Right. Again, hello. Welcome to those of you that have just joined. I'm Nikki. I'm Senior Rights Content Manager at Belinda. Belinda is the world-leading independent audiobook publisher, and we are the creators of BorrowBox, which, as I'm sure a lot of you will already know, it's the UK's leading library app, which provides e-audiobooks, ebooks, and e-magazines. I'm here today to introduce you to the phenomenal Phil Earle. He is one of my favorite authors, to be honest, but he is more specifically, I guess, the author of Being Billy, which was nominated for dozens of awards, including the Carnegie Medal and the Warson's Children's Book Prize. While the Sky Falls was British Book Award winner for children's fictions in 2022, as well as being named the Times Children's Book of the Year. I love that you're holding it up. You're so well prepared.
Always on brand. Thank you.
Love this. So, as I've already said, I'm a massive, massive fan of yours, and I'm hoping that today we're going to be able to convert a few more little listeners into being massive fans too. But a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We're going to kick off with the Q&A in a minute, which have been filled with questions kindly supplied by Cornwall Library Education Service. However, there will be an opportunity for all of you listeners to kind of input and put your own questions forward. All you have to do is click the Q&A button at the bottom, and you should be able to submit your questions there. I will do my very best to get through as many of them as I can. We are limited on time, but I will see what I can do for you guys. If you're a student watching with your class, please let your teacher know of any questions you'd like to ask, and we can see how many we get through. And just to let everyone know, we will be recording this event and sharing it afterwards. I'm sure you know this already, but as a privacy notice, only mine and Phil's cameras can be seen. We can't see any of you guys, and you will not be recorded. Don't worry about it. But without further ado, and on to the very good fun stuff, it's my pleasure to properly introduce you to Phil, who is going to kick us off with a reading of his gorgeous book, Wild Storm Rages.
I am. So I thought, rather than reading you the opening chapter, I thought I would read you a little piece from about halfway through. So, where to start? War has broken out. It is September 1939. 2 weeks before this point, Noah here, his dad has marched off to war. And as Noah's dad marches off to war, he makes his dad a promise. His dad says to him, right, Noah, firstly, behave yourself, because Noah is a little bit of a scallywag, always getting into trouble. Behave yourself, look after your mum, and whatever you do, look after the dog. Keep Win safe. If you can keep Win safe, Dad says, I'll be all right while I'm away fighting. You keep Win safe and I will come back alive. It'll be like I'm bulletproof. Noah says, I'll do that, Dad. I'll keep the dog safe. 2 weeks later, this booklet, which maybe we can talk about later, arrives from the government that says it's not going to be safe for your pet, so you should have them put to sleep. And as a result, his mum says, that's what we've got to do. And at that point, Noah's life falls apart, because he thinks if he has Win put to sleep, he thinks his dad's not going to be safe. His dad won't come home safe from the war. So behind his mum's back, he comes up with this plan. And it involves stealing his dad's boat, which is little more than a bathtub, really. It's pretty rusty as well. And he rounds up as many animals as he can, and he gets them all on board the boat. And there are dogs, and there are cats, and there are guinea pigs and hamsters and birds, and there's a donkey in a sun hat for some reason, and Big Col, who's Noah's sort of nemesis at school, the school bully, turns out he's got a 20-foot python in a sack called Delilah, and that ends up on boat too. And they start sailing this boat downriver to save the animals. The only thing is the boat isn't seaworthy. 2 days on, it's overheating to such an extent that the boat sets fire. And Noah quickly has to steer it to the side of the riverbank, tie it up, and get all the animals off safely. And he manages it. And he stands there with his mate Big Col and Clem, and they watch this boat burn. But then they realise something awful has happened. There's still one animal left on board, and that animal is Big Col's python called Delilah, tied up in a sack. And Noah being Noah decides he's going to run back on board to save it. And this is what happens next. At that moment, Surrounded by fire and smoke and the remains of his dad's beloved boat, Noah wondered if his impetuousness had finally caught up with him. The power of the flame seemed to be shrivelling his skin, and no matter which way he moved, it worsened. The smoke, too, it was thick and acrid, making him hack so hard that he thought his lungs had burst. And with watering eyes, it felt impossible to see. "Delilah!" he yelled. Though he had no idea why, the snake was hardly likely to call back. In fact, he only found her by accident, tripping over her as he groped instinctively. As his feet made contact with the Hessian, he felt the lump inside kick back. Was she trying to bite him? The next problem was how to get both the sack and himself off the boat. The flames were incessant now, so high and vicious that Noah had no idea which way the gangplank lay. All he knew was that he was surrounded, and the only thing he could do was take a guess and hope for the best. As he tried to lift the sack, he realised the next of his problems. It was too heavy. He tried again and again and again, but whilst he might have raised it past his knees, he simply couldn't get the leverage he needed to hoist it onto his back. Once more, he thought, one more try. But as he strained, a new flame erupted from below deck, throwing Noah onto his front and onto the sack, causing Delilah to hiss through the Hessian. Noah screamed. He couldn't help it. How long did he have? It wouldn't be long, seconds maybe. So if he was going to do this, it had to be now. Now. He pulled himself to his feet and planted them either side of the sack. He'd seen athletes do it on the cinema newsreel, those Scottish hammer throwers, veins practically exploding from the sides of the necks as they cast a lump of iron further than was humanly possible. He didn't even have to throw his sack that far. All he had to do was clear the flames and mould his flank. He could do this. He had to. So with every bit of strength he had, he gripped the sack and, ignoring the flames and sparks nipping at his skin, he hauled it to shin level and began to spin. It was not easy. He was tired and dizzy and flustered. Plus there was precious little space on the deck that wasn't already alight. His lungs burned, as did his skin, but he didn't stop. He couldn't, he daren't. All he could do was build every bit of momentum he had until, dervish-like, he span so hard that his arms and the sack were now at a right angle to his body. He had no idea if he had enough momentum or strength left in his body to do what he needed to do. He had no idea if Delilah could survive the shock. But he couldn't think about that. He was simply giving the animal the best chance of survival that he could. So this was it. The moment. Do or die. And so with one final spin and a cry that rumbled deep from the depths of him, Noah let go. And the sack and Delilah went flying. I'll pause there.
Oh my God, thank you so much for that, Phil. I was fully settled in and ready just to let you keep going. But alas, we have questions from everyone who's watching, and I'm sure they are absolutely dying to have them answered. So I'm going to start our Q&A with the questions that were provided by Cornwall Library Education Service. So my first question for you is, what inspired you to be a writer?
I never wanted to be. Growing up, you meet a lot of writers and they all say the same thing. You know, they all say, oh, you know, from the age of 3, I knew, and I had a typewriter and I was banging out these little books that I stapled together and sold at work and at school rather. And it wasn't like that for me. I wasn't a good reader as a kid. I wasn't a good reader of novels. I used to do one thing. If you gave me a book like this, I used to panic. Because when I opened it up inside, it was just this like wall of words, and that felt insurmountable to me. It felt too difficult. I didn't feel smart enough. Didn't feel like I had the concentration span. And as a result, because I grew up in the 70s and 80s, you know, that's the, you know, it's the 1970s and 80s, not the 1870s and 80s. But like teachers were different then.
Clarifying.
Teachers were different, you know. Teachers now see reading differently. But when I was a kid, it was like, if you want to be classed as a reader, you know, you have to be reading novels. It's all about reading novels. And I felt excluded. I thought I wasn't a reader, but I was, because all the way through growing up, I read stuff like, you know, this was my favourite moment of the week, which was when Roy the Rovers arrived every Monday, because, you know, it was only 16 pages, But when you opened it up, there was a story that I could get on board with, you know. And I know it's words and pictures together, but it's still reading. And this is what makes me cross most about attitudes to reading. This idea that you have to be reading novels to be a reader. And when I go into schools, which I do a lot, I always say, you know, you don't even have to read with your eyes. You know, you can read with your ears, for goodness sake. You know, it's when I was a kid, if I used to say, oh, I'd listen to an audio book, my teacher would say, well, that's not proper reading. And it's nonsense. You know, listening to a story, it still demands the same attention, the same concentration, the same imagination to put yourself inside that story. But that is still reading. So it was a thing about realizing that stories and reading take on many forms: comics, magazines, novels, poetry, audiobooks. And it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I discovered a book, a novel that I could get on board with. And I found it by accident because I got a job in a bookshop just to pay the bills. And I was made to work in the kids department, and they made me read this. This is Holes by Lewis Sacca. And it's, for me, pretty much the perfect book, the greatest book ever written, because it's only 200 pages long, but it covers 200 years of history. And it's like, it's a drama, it's a comedy, it's a western, it's a crime book, it's a murder book, it's a mystery book. It's got, it's like ideas fizzing.
Got it all.
Yeah, everything. And it was that book that made me want to be a writer. You know, that book opened the door. And that's all you need, I think, is one story that opens the door to you, that allows you to become a reader. But it doesn't have to look like this. It can still be graphic novels. You know, there are so many great graphic novels you can read, or journalism, or audiobooks. But this book in particular was the one that kind of really spurred me on.
So good. So what age would you say you were roughly when you first started writing your first book?
I was 28. I was 28. So I started working the bookshop at 26, read Holes. And for the next 2 years, the bookshop was great because they used to allow me to take books home free. As long as I didn't break the spine or turn the page over to mark them, they were like, you can borrow what you want, just bring it back in mint condition. So I read everything I could, but it was all kids stuff. And I'm still the same now. I find children's books excite me so fundamentally, you know, because when I read, I want someone to tell me a story. You know, and children's writers are brilliant at that. They allow you to escape with them. So I read Jacqueline Wilson, I read Lemony Snicket, I read David Almond, S.E. Hinton, Keith Gray, Kevin Brooks, Mallory Blackman. I just immersed myself in it for 2 years, and then it gave me the bug. Do you know what I mean? It was like, I want to see if I can do this, you know. And I couldn't. I was terrible at it, but you know, that was the start.
Clearly not true.
Well, it is, because it took me a long time. It took me about eight or 9 years to write anything that was good enough to get people's interest, you know. But that's fine, you know. That's part of the journey, isn't it? You know, if you want to be
Practice makes perfect.
good at anything, you've got to apply yourself. You've got to buckle down and put in the practice.
Sure. So how long did it actually take you to finish When the Sky Falls once you found that idea?
So When the Sky Falls, I generally find if I'm writing a novel now, which is When the Sky Falls or While the Storm Rages, are somewhere between 60 and 70,000 words. And what I try to do is finish a first draft within 6 months. And then I send it off to my editor, Charlie, who is a freaking genius and understands story like nobody else I've ever met. And she generally sends it back covered in pen going, well, it's not bad, it's all right, you know, but you got a lot of work to do. And I subsequently, you know, I try and over the next 6 months to get it from that point to a finished point. When the Sky Falls took me a good 5 or 6 sort of drafts. Not changing everything, but, you know, at first quite significant bits would disappear and new bits would come in. And then it was about just sort of honing it, really. So I tried to make it a year. I tried to have a novel come out every single year. So yeah, that's the sort of time scale I set.
Pretty good. And how do you come up with the ideas for them? Like, where does your inspiration come from? Does it come from things in every day or something you hear about that just kind of piques your interest?
It's everything, mate, really. That's for me, that's the most beautiful thing about writing is and it is, I promise you this is true. It's not just a corny line. It's just that we are literally surrounded by them. They're everywhere. You know, and what I realised was like the only thing that stops you spotting them are these blooming things. And we're all married to them, and we all walk down the phone every day when our head's buried in them. And as we're walking down the street and we're knocking into a lamppost and knocking over grandmas. You know, it's like there's stuff happening. You know, every day. If you put your phone in your pocket 20 minutes every day, you'll spot their stories. They're out there. So, I mean, for example, I mean, when the sky falls, I think is the best example of this. I think in this book came about because of a really simple story that out of nowhere my friend Pete told me. So my friend Pete, we've been friends for over 20 years. He's in his 80s now. And we were on holiday together one year, 5, 6, maybe 7 years ago. And we were just sat round the campfire in this site. And he just, out of nowhere, just started telling me this story about his dad during the Second World War. And his dad wasn't allowed to fight because he had like chronic asthma. So he's part of the Home Guard. And every time the air raid siren rang to let him know that the Luftwaffe were going to fly over Manchester and bomb it, his dad had one job, which was to grab a rifle and leg it to Bellevue Zoo. And his one job was to sit there all night outside the lion's cage with his rifle trained through the bars pointing at the lion. Because if the Nazis dropped the bomb and it landed on the cage and it blew out the wall, that lion would get free, and that lion would be hungry, scared, confused, angry, could kill dozens, hundreds of people in minutes. And that was it. For me, that was like, I don't think I'll ever have a moment like it as a writer where like it literally felt like somebody had plugged me into the mains. And even now talking about it, I've got goosebumps. Because for me, that's a story. That's a story waiting to be written. And the only question I had to ask myself was, what if? Like, you know, what if the rifle in that story didn't end up in the arms of a responsible adult like it had in Pete's story, but what if it landed in the arms of an angry 12-year-old kid? And what if the animal inside the cage wasn't a lion anymore? What if it was this grumpy, angry silverback gorilla called Adonis? And what if those two beings, despite being enemies at the start, became great friends? And what if by the end that the bombs are falling and Joseph has to make a big decision, which is could he and would he pull the trigger on the one thing in his life that he really loves? So, you know, for me, it's the beauty of that moment. The moment when that story hits you is like palpable, it's huge, and it literally can come from anywhere. I've written books because of things my kids have said to me. My daughter one day came in and said to me, "Dad, what would happen if everything I touched turned to chocolate?" I wrote a book about that. You know,
Brilliant.
my son Stan, his new team needed a new football kit and we couldn't afford it. So I thought I wrote a book about that, and we used the money to buy kit for his kids' team. I've written books because of films. I've written books because of news reports. You know, that it's the tiniest little moment in life can become a really blooming big adventure, you know, and that excites me. That's the thing that makes me want to write.
Does this mean that you are possibly working on something new and exciting?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm just hopefully we'll finish a first draft of something in the next few days. So we've kind of when I set out writing When the Sky Falls, I didn't have a plan to write more World War II books. But as I was writing When the Sky Falls, the idea for this came along. And thankfully, these books have done really well, and people seem to have enjoyed them, which has been wonderful. Which meant my publisher said, "Well, why don't we do a third book and make it a kind of loose sort of trilogy in a way of blitz animal stories?" And that really excited me. And I discovered a story about a dog during World War II. There was a dog called Rip, R-I-P, it was spelled, and it was a stray dog. And one day during the Blitz, the house it was living nearby got levelled by a bomb, and this air raid warden found the dog in there and adopted it, took it in. What turned out, though, was that this dog had the most amazing sense of smell ever. This dog could sniff out a body in a bombed out building better than anything else in the world. And this dog, Rip, went on to save over 100 people from bombed out buildings. And he was given the highest honour that any animal can be given, which is called the Dickens Medal. And so that was my starting point. So I thought, okay, I've got a dog. What do dogs not get on with? Okay, dogs and cats generally not a good thing. So right, I'll chuck a cat in as well. And then I thought, right, I need a third animal. And so this this pigeon. I really like this. There's lots of stories about pigeons during the World Wars saving the day. I don't know about you knowing this. They used to use them to relay messages, you know, between trenches in World War One, for example, and they were a really important part of us winning the war. So I thought, what if there was a carrier pigeon who thought he was a soldier? So so I've got a dog, a loyal stray dog, a really surly, manipulative, grumpy cat, and a pigeon who thinks he's a soldier, and they're all about to go on this cross-country trip because they've been estranged from their little girl, and their little girl is living down on the coast, and then something awful happens to their mum and dad, so they have to make this incredible journey across the country to be reunited, and there's lots of obstacles that stand in their path. So it's going to be called Until the Road Ends, and it's coming out in I think it's June next year. Yeah.
Well, you fully sold it to me. I'm
Good,
definitely
bless
going
you.
to be a customer on that one. So we're now going to move over a little bit and talk to our friends at Cornwall and across the UK to get their questions in. So listeners, if you have any questions, now is the perfect time to pop them in the Q&A box or ask your teacher or guardian to pop them in on your behalf. But I can actually already see quite a few popping in on the corner of my screen, so I will just dive right in, but feel free to keep sending more in as we go. First question is possibly the best question that could have been asked, I think, is, does Phil have any pets?
Yeah. Oh, yes. We've got 3. So our house is quite a busy house. So we have 5 children who sometimes feel like they are not pets but wild animals. But yeah, I'll take you on a walk because you can come and meet them if you'd like to. So they're just in here. We're lucky enough to have 2. Lenny, who's this? So this is Lenny. Lenny is a very sleepy Bedlington Whippet, but she's normally a very naughty one. Lenny is 2. Here's Nancy. Nancy is 11, and she's a much more sleepy dog, and she's beautiful. And in here, I don't know if you can see in here, we have our own dragon. Can you see him in the corner there? That's Baz.
Wow.
Yeah, there's Baz. Baz is a bearded dragon, and he does nothing but sleep, lie under his sun lamp, and eat locusts. So life isn't that interesting for Baz. But yeah, I mean, the animals are really important. The animals have become a big part of my writing because I love the loyalty that animals show you. You know, it doesn't matter what's going on in your day; they can make a fundamental difference to how you are feeling. So yeah, it's great having them in the house.
Good answer. What is your favourite of the books that you've written?
Oh man, that's tough. I've had 22 books published now over the last sort of 11 years, which for someone that never wanted to write so much as a shopping list, that feels like a bit of a surprise. But and for a long time, when I would get asked that question, my answer would always be the same, which is that it's I can't pick one. You know, like it's such a surprise to me that I've ended up being a writer that I can't pick one book that means more to me than any of the others. But I can now. Actually, it's changed, and it's When the Sky Falls. Because actually, before I started writing this book, I hadn't written for about 2 years. I was finding life really quite difficult. I was struggling with my health, and I just didn't think I had anything else to say. Do you know what I mean? I thought I was kind of done. But it was the strength of the idea that Pete had given me that brought me back, and all the sort of negative things I was feeling, and the illness I was feeling. The writing of this book really helped. It was a really big part of me feeling a much happier person again. And it's gone. I mean, you know, the fact that it's gone on to do so well, and you know, luckily win these awards, and now we're talking about writing a TV sort of script for it and things like that. You know, there's so many exciting things. So I just feel like this book has been the most tremendous gift. Do you know what I mean? I feel incredibly lucky that I was offered that story and that I could sort of jump on it. So yeah, this one definitely.
How about of other authors' books? What are your favourite or maybe even least favourite books that you've read?
I find it difficult to give you a least favourite because I tend to put books down if I don't enjoy them. Do you know what I mean? It's like
That's advice.
I think it's the best advice you can give a reader. It's like, why on earth would you punish yourself with a book that you're not enjoying? Do you know what I mean? Put it down. Pick something new up. Life's too short to be reading books that you don't enjoy. In terms of favourites, I mean, it depends what day of the week you ask me. I've got like a shelf here, which is I've got this sort of I've got this. Can you see that weird kind of branchy shelf? And
Great book.
that's got all my favourite books. This is like if you make it onto this shelf here, you've done really well. So there's like Brock by Anthony McGowan, which is amazing. There is the first Lemony Snicket book, The Bad Beginning, which I just think is brilliant. There's the greatest football book ever written. I'm a football maniac. And Keeper by Mal Peet is undoubtedly the best football book ever written. What else have we got? Monster Calls, Patrick Ness, Jim Kay. Danny, Champion of the World, the best Roald Dahl that there is.
Excellent choices.
What else have we got? Couldn't possibly not have Skellig up there by David Almond. What else? Two more. One by Sarah Crossan, which won the Carnegie Medal a few years ago, and is nothing short of magnificent. And then finally, I think this one as well. So this is The Machine Gunners by Robert Westall, which is a really big inspiration on any of the war books that I've written, because that's, I think, the greatest war book that there's been written for young people. So there's a few.
Some fantastic recommendations there for anyone who hasn't read any of those. Do you have any tips on becoming an author, or any maybe writing tips for kids in schools?
I think writing tips are difficult, because what works for me might not work for anyone else. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't plan my books. I just sit down with an idea and see where it goes. I don't necessarily write every day because I've got another job, and sometimes I don't have the time, or I've got to walk the dogs or unload the dishwasher, or do you know what I mean? But I think, and a lot of writers would say read. They would say read as much as you can, read and read and read and read. And whilst I agree with some of that, I think what's more important than just reading is, I think it's more important that you understand what makes a good story. And so to be a good writer, I don't think you need to be a massive reader. I'm not a massive reader, and maybe that reflects in the quality of my writing, but I have learned more about how to write books through watching really good films, watching really good TV. I'm not talking about Home and Away and Neighbours, I'm talking about watching like really great well written TV dramas or films. Going to the theatre, I learned so much about how to write dialogue, about how characters talk to each other by going to the theatre. So there are loads of different ways that you can improve your writing. It's practice, though. It's practice. It's that thing of allowing yourself to be not very good at first. The first things I wrote were shocking. My mum and dad told me they were brilliant. They told me it was better than that Harry Potter. But you've got to give yourself time to develop as a writer. So a lot of it is just practice. Trying not to write like someone else, trying to write like you. I can't write like David Almond. I'd love to be able to write like David Almond, but I can't. The most important thing is that I work out how I write and what I sound like, and develop your own voice, and only tell the stories that you're interested in. I think that's the best bit of advice. Only tell the stories. When I'm telling a story, it's literally got to be burning a hole inside of me to be told. And if I'm not telling that story, then I'm not going to write the best story I can. I think you've got to write, whatever you're writing, you've got to write with passion, with absolute passion and heart. I think that's the important bit.
I think that's fantastic advice. Is there like a space or a ritual or something you do to kind of get you in the zone when you're writing your books, like somewhere you always go or something you always eat?
No, not really. I mean, what's really interesting, the first four books that I got published, which were young adult novels for Penguin, every single word of those books was written on the X68 bus to and from work. So I lived in Crystal Palace in London. I used to travel into central London every day, and it was about an hour each way. And I used to write them on the top deck of the bus, because that was the only time I had to write, because I was still working full time. I had 2 kids. And so I used to love writing on the bus. As long as I didn't feel scared someone was going to pinch my laptop, it was absolutely fine. So I've learned to write on the move. Do you know what I mean? I write quickly and I write wherever I can. I can write on the train, I can write on the bus, I can write on my phone if I have to. Uh, I can write for 20 minutes here and there. Do you know what I mean? Some authors said, oh, you must sit at a desk for 5 hours a day with absolute silence or with only classical music playing in the background. And it's like, it doesn't have to be like that. It's about, the more you do it, the better you will be at it, I think, personally, because it's like your brain's a muscle. And if you want to get fit, you exercise. And it's the same with writing. The more you write, the better you will become. But I've had to learn to write quickly because I don't have a lot of time. Even now, I still have another job 3 days a week, which means my writing time is quite tight. So no time for rituals. Straight in, get the words down.
Do you try and make sure that your stories always have like a moral to them, or is this just something that seems to happen?
I'm not so much worried about morals and themes and symbols and stuff like that. I mean, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, when the sky falls, it's been wonderful. So many librarians and teachers have picked that book up and started using it in schools, and they're talking about the themes and the language used and stuff. But I'm not conscious of that as I write. All I'm trying to do when I start writing is tell myself a story. Do you know what I mean? I don't think about it being a story for children or adults. It's a story for me. And so the most important thing is that I am occupying and entertaining myself while I'm writing. So that's what I want to do. I think as what happens inevitably as you start to write, themes do start to emerge, and there are certain themes across my books which I think you can spot in an awful lot of them, but that's not intentional. I think it's just because as a writer, you write about the things that are on your mind, whether that's consciously or unconsciously. The things you are feeling end up spilling out onto the page. So it's great if you can get morals in there, but it's not my job to tell people what good morals are. Everyone has their own moral compass. All I want to do really is tell the best story I can.
Perfect. So now that you've introduced us to all of your pets, would you base a book on any of your pets?
Yeah, I mean, well, so in When the Sky Falls, there's a very scruffy dog called Tweedy, and she is absolutely based on Nancy, the older dog in there. So we didn't have Lenny when when I started writing it, but Tweedy's absolutely based on Nancy. And then there's Win in this one, and Win is a kind of amalgamation really of Nancy and Lenny. You know, they're scraggly, scruffy, and it's that thing when you have a dog. It's that thing you pretty much do anything for it. I know it sounds daft, you know, but for me it's not daft. It's that thing of they give you so much that the notion that I would have to have my animal put to sleep is so abhorrent to me that that was a really good thing to channel into Noah's feelings. It made it feel more believable, I hope.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite animal?
Oh, dog, definitely.
Oh, that was a quick answer. That was straight in there.
I have. I mean, you know, I know there's a big cat loving brigade out there, but I am not one of them. I'm
team dog.
Oh, I'm quite allergic to cats, which doesn't help, I think. But no, I do not. I have no time for cats. I don't. What is the point in a cat? So no, it's all about the dog.
And what is your fondest childhood memory?
Oh wow, that's a good one.
It's a good one.
My fondest childhood memory. I think going on holiday, like a proper holiday for the first time, was quite big. Instead of going on in like a leaky tent to the Isle of Wight, do you know what I mean, and just getting rained on for 7 days. When I was about 8, so it would have been around 1982, something like that. Me and my parents and my brother and my uncle and aunt, we went to Spain on a plane. Do you know what I mean? And we got to dive off the rocks into the sea and eat all this exotic food. And yes, I think going to Spain for the first time, that was, yeah, that's a pretty fond one. Either that or being mascot for Hull City. And that was 1982 as well. I was mascot for Hull City against Bradford City. 30th of March, I think it was, 1982. That was a pretty fun memory as well. The nearest I got to being a professional footballer, anyway.
Take the win. So if you didn't want to be a writer when you were younger, what did you want to be?
Yeah, it was all about football. I desperately wanted to play for Hull City, who are, of course, the greatest team that's ever walked the earth. But it was wrecked. I'll show you, actually. It was wrecked and ravaged by something quite simple but very fundamental, which was these things. I discovered that I had a lifelong addiction to Frazzles by the time I was 14, which ended my football career because they made me so out of shape I couldn't run a bath. Never mind out up and down a football pitch for 90 minutes. I love these things more than life, and I know they don't get many in a packet, like, but they are deadly. Deadly. Stay away from them.
Full of flavour though, totally worth it.
Oh, amazing.
I've got requests coming in on the corner of my screen saying that you need to write a book about a mascot.
A book about a mascot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah,
I've got all the ideas coming in for you now.
there's lots of good. There are already lots of. There's a couple of stories that I'd seen on the internet which I thought were quite interesting about in the various world wars, one or two, about various regiments having animal mascots. You know, like a dog that was their mascot or a pigeon or whatever. So yeah, I think there might be something in that. I think there definitely might be something in that. Yeah.
Everyone's going to be thrilled that they've inspired your next story now.
Not out of the question.
I think we've got time for one last question, which is, what does the day in the life look like for you as a writer?
Oh, I don't know if there is one sort of typical day. I mean, it's really rare for me to sit down and write all day. It's really rare. Mainly because I've just got that much going on with you know, the family or the house or work or whatever. My ideal day, I think, would be if I could get up, write for a couple of hours, get a couple of thousand words done, right, for the morning. That would be brilliant, and then going and doing an event in the afternoon. That would be the dream. I writing books is great, and I will always do it, I think, because you end up, as I said earlier, with these stories inside you that you're desperate to tell. But there's something incredibly special about doing this sort of thing that we're doing now, about going out and speaking to the people that you actually write for. And there's no greater thrill for me than standing in a school hall in front of a bunch of year 6 or 7 or year 8 or whoever they are. Year 9s are difficult. Oh, they're tricky, but you know, still fun. But doing that as well it's an absolute joy. So I guess the ideal day would be writing in the morning, event in the afternoon. That would be mint for me. Yeah, I'd like that.
Home to a packet of Frazzles, done.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's inevitable. Not too many. I reckon 4 or 5 packs would be.
That's perfect. That's the limit. That's where we'll end it. Right. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Phil. I've had an absolute ball, and I'm sure everyone has learned a lot from you. And hopefully you've inspired lots of people to not just pick up your books, but to pick up whatever it is that they learn to enjoy reading or listening to, or whatever it is. To everyone watching, please do note that throughout September, Phil's brilliant book, When the Sky Falls, is available without queues on the BorrowBox app. So you can all go download BorrowBox, listen to the brilliant audiobook without talking about it, and talk to everyone you like. It'll be perfect. If your parents don't have the BorrowBox app on their phones yet, be sure to tell them it's free with their local library membership. It has tons of brilliant books and audiobooks, not just for kids, but for adults too. It's got something for everybody. To round the session out nicely and give you something a little bit of a treat to carry on with your day, we're going to hand back to Phil, who has come back with a brilliant little activity for you all to have. Here you go.
Yeah, just it's a quick one. It's just something that might start you thinking. So I love this idea that behind every front door on the street where you live, there's at least one story waiting for you to retell. So imagine your neighbour, you're watching out the front door, out your front window, not from your bedroom window with binoculars and a notepad, police don't like that, but you're watching someone as they leave their house one day for work, and they're dragging behind them a suitcase that looks so heavy it weighs a ton, only to come back half an hour later and that suitcase is now empty, as light as a feather. My creative challenge to you is to say, what was in the case? Was it gold? Was it cash? Was it jewels, diamonds, sapphires, rubies, emeralds? Was it a body? Was it drugs? Because if you can answer that first question, I guarantee you it'll lead you to the next question. And the next question might be, okay, so there's money in there. How much money? £1 million. Okay, where did they get the money from? They robbed it from a bank. How did they get into a bank? They knocked the building down side of the wall with a wrecking ball. What they're going to spend the money on? They're going to buy a speedboat and the best MacBook you've ever seen. Okay, who's going to stop them getting away with that crime? And so by asking those questions, one after another, that little moment in time can very quickly become a story that's waiting for you to tell. And all you had was a suitcase that was heavy and then it was light. The only thing you have to do is ask the question, what if? What if there was something valuable or dramatic in that case? The rest of it is up to you. The rest of it is just playtime. You know that moment at school when the bell rings, especially when you're in junior school, and the bell rings and you can run into the playground and pretend to be anyone you want to be, go on any adventure you want to go on. That's what it's like being a writer. When you're a writer, it's like the bell's rung. When you can run out into the playground, because when I'm writing, there's nowhere I can't go, nothing I can't do, no world I can't create, no person I can't pretend to be, no adventure that I can't go on. And for me, that's powerful, and that's fun, you know, because as you get older it stinks because playtime disappears because you have to get jobs. It's rubbish, kids. But while you're writing, it's playtime. Go anywhere, do anything, be anyone. And that little exercise can give you a little fleeting glimpse into how powerful your imagination can be.
Thank you. I'm definitely going to go home and do this now.
Yes.
Thank you so much for today, Phil. It has been the best.
Thank you, mate. Thank you all.